So in the second part of this series, we're going to talk about superannuation that affects you and the terms that you'll hear about. And of course, the most common one you'll hear is super guarantee. Now, super guarantee is the compulsory super that your employer has to pay on your wages. But it's important for you to know what part of those wages your employer has to pay superannuation on, because it's not the entire wages all the time or for everybody. So we've got a list on our homepage, and I'll put the link in below just to give you a check sheet on the things that super has to be paid on and the parts of your wages that superannuation doesn't have to be paid on. And that's important, of course, so that you can make sure that you're being paid the super that you should be paid. Most employers do the right thing, but unfortunately there are some employers in the country that don't pay super in time or don't pay the right amount of super. Superannuation, the amount of the super guarantee currently is 10.5% of your wages or the eligible wages. And that's going up 0.5% every year for the next couple of years until it reaches 12%. So super guarantee needs to be paid by your employer into your fund. So your fund should have received the money by 28 days after the quarter ends. Now the quarter ends are March, June, September and December. So your money should be in your fund by the 28th of July, 28th of October, 28th of January and 28th of April. If it's not, chat to your employer because they will need to do what we call a super guarantee form to the tax office to tell the tax office that they haven't paid that superannuation on time. They then have penalties to pay and interest that you have lost so that you're not disadvantaged by not having your money invested in your superannuation fund. So it is important that you understand, one, whether you've been paid, two, have you been paid correctly? Now, the next thing that I want to talk about here is, are your monies in superannuation invested in what is best for you? And this is what we call your risk profile. So a risk profile is your tolerance to your investment strategy. So we have conservative investments, which doesn't have the ups and downs of the market, and they tend to be cash or defensive assets, we call them. So things that don't change too much with the market. Property is another good defensive investment. And then we have what we call growth investments. They're things like shares. So there's a lot of movement. So your risk tolerance is determining how comfortable you are, or what we call the sleep test. And I call it the sleep test because if you can put your head on the pillow overnight and not stress about something, then you're in the right profile. But of course, your superannuation fund doesn't know what your risk profile is unless you tell them. So please, no burying of your head in the sand. Do a risk profile assessment to work out what your risk tolerance is. So if you're high growth, then you will have lots of investments in shares. If you're a conservative investor, then you will have lots of investments in cash where there's not as many fluctuations. So it's important that you know what your risk tolerance is or what your risk strategy is so that you can tell your superannuation fund. Now, if you don't know what your risk profile is, get in touch with us here at 123 Financial Group and we can give you a questionnaire which will determine what your risk profile is so that you can make sure that your superannuation is invested correctly. Of course, if you're not invested correctly, like let's say you're a high growth investor, which means you should have a lot of your superannuation invested in shares, but your superannuation body, particularly the some of the industry funds, will work it based on your age. And so once you reach a certain age, they say you're getting closer to retirement, you shouldn't be in a high risk profile, so we'll move you more back to a conservative. And that's fine if you're conservative. But if you are a high risk profile person and you're invested in a conservative profile, you're potentially missing out on some growth or some income in your investment, which means you may not have as much money in superannuation as you should be if you were invested correctly. So it is so important that you know what your risk profile is, that you check that your superannuation has been paid by your employer by the due date, that your superannuation has been paid on the correct amount of your income. And the other thing that I want to point out to you is from the 1st of July 2022, the government removed the 450 threshold for superannuation. So this was a threshold where if you weren't paid more than $450 in a calendar month, your employer didn't have to pay superannuation for you. Now that's been removed, which is great, because if you were working 2 low-paid jobs or a couple of low-paid jobs, then you potentially were missing out on superannuation. And of course, so many employers now employ us on a casual basis, and COVID's really hit into our income. So many people didn't get the superannuation that they should have got under the old rules. So please check all those things. I've put links below to a lot of those things that I was talking about, so you can do a risk profile check. You can find out what your wages should have super paid on them. And I've also put a link in there to book an appointment with one of us if you need to have a look at your superannuation. So that's it for this video. I've got lots of other videos on all the other different terms and things. So jump on over and watch those and get your head around your super.